There we go. All right. So, Brian, whenever you're ready, if you'd like to introduce yourself for us, and anyone has any questions, just let me know. All right. Thanks, Brian. Go ahead.
Thanks so much, Kyle. It's good to be here with you guys tonight. I don't know about you, but Christmas coming, pandemic's on. It's already been a long week, and so I have been looking forward to having a couple of drinks with you folks. And to reiterate something that Kyle said, I'm not real close to the computer right now because I've had to set up to so I could kind of have everything shown here. So I will not be able to see the chat or the private chat or anything like that. So Kyle's gonna take care of all that for us. So we are here tonight to talk about Victorian punch, and I was especially excited when Kyle and I first got to talking about this because I asked him, I was like, okay, what slice of the Victorian period are we talking about here? It was a long period, it lasted from 1837 to 1901, and he said, let's go 1860 to 70. That's about the time period that the castle up there recreates. And I then got very excited because this is really a fascinating point in the history of the 19th century to look at where punch was going and to look at where drinks were going in general, just the way that people approached the way that they consumed distilled spirits, especially. There's kind of the earlier version of punch on the way out and the newer version of punch on the way in, and we're gonna look at a little bit of both and how they're coexisting at this moment in history. This is also the dawn of the pre-classic era, kind of the Victorian era of cocktails, which is reflected in some of the things that they were calling punch in the 1860s. We think of cocktails a lot of times, when people think of classic cocktails, old-fashioned cocktails, they're thinking of the things that really developed no earlier than the 1890s and really kind of hit their heyday in Prohibition. Well, before Prohibition, and that's kind of what characterized Prohibition. But there was this whole era of cocktails when people switched away from focusing on the batch cocktail to the individual cocktail in the Victorian period that has a whole different character to it. If you were to compare it to wine, think of the classic era being Chardonnay and the Victorian era being port. It was a very rich, round, often sweet version of the cocktail, which kind of goes hand in hand with the way the Victorians approached a lot of things that they consumed. And so that has been a really rewarding journey for me to discover that lesser explored period of cocktails. With the sources that we'll be using for tonight, we're going to base this all in primary source documentation. The other exciting thing about this period is this is when people start to really write bartending manuals. It's not that nobody wrote it down before, they did, but nobody had done anything like Jerry Thomas had done. Jerry Thomas came out with his first edition of his bartender manual in 1862. He was kind of a celebrity bartender. He had been on the scene for quite a few years at that point, but this is really the first bartending manual as we think of it. And in my opinion, it is still to this day one of the best. And for decades after Jerry Thomas put this book out, because he started getting a whole slew of bartending manuals after that. A lot of it really reflected what Thomas had done in the drinks that they were still using, in some cases even into the 1880s. So this we could do a class every week for a year on Jerry Thomas's recipes and still not run out of material. So I didn't want to just go with one source. Of course, we've got to have some balance here. And so we're also going to be looking at the Steward and Barkeeper's Manual by Jesse Haney and Company that came out in 1869. And that really did have a lot in common with Jerry Thomas, but they had a lot of their own stuff going on too, and it was pretty comprehensive. And we're also going to be looking at another thing called Oxford Nightcaps. Oxford Night, they started publishing this book no later than 1827, and they continued through the 19th century. And so it's a really interesting look at how things were and were not changing in Oxford. We're actually going to use it for an example of older styles hanging on. So those are going to be our three main primary source examples. Now we're going to balance that with some secondary sources. You cannot intelligently discuss the history of spirits, mixology, punch anything like that without being familiar with David Wondrich's work. Okay, he wrote Imbibe and later Punch. This guy, even if you want to disagree with him, you can't really, you can't comment intelligently without being familiar with his work, because you're just going to be leaving information on the table. These are probably the best resources ever written about research into just the way spirits have evolved, the way they were in the 19th century, and then what to do with them. So you really, you got to be familiar with that work, and he really helps you to flesh out the primary source documents. So even if you don't go in the same direction that he did, he will help set you on the right path. And so really got to give David Wondrich credit for his work on all this. I also want to point out, if you can ever find a copy of this book, it's from the early 80s, and it's called Convivial Dickens. It's not very common anymore, I don't think. I'm not actually taking any recipes out of this tonight, because the ones that I wanted to use, they didn't cite their source. And so I can't really do that in a museum format where we're really focusing on a specific time period. But this is also has some great tips. The recipes are fantastic, and it's all based around the drinks that are featured in Dickens's work. So of course, Charles Dickens, Queen Victoria, Prince Albert kind of invented Christmas as we see it. It was celebrated before, but kind of our nice, cozy, family-friendly version of it was, ties a lot back to them. So check that out if you can. Another thing I want to say about going into these primary source documents is you can do it. Okay, there are a lot of people who shy away from it. They'll tell you it can't be done, it's impossible, it's unintelligible. I swallowed that for a long time before I just grabbed the book and got to work on it. And I'm going to tell you, if somebody tells you that, there's one of three things happening. Most of the time, they heard it from somebody else, and so they repeated it, and they didn't actually try. They looked at it, were overwhelmed, and didn't try, or they tried once, failed, and never went back to it. Okay, but I'm telling you, we're going to talk about some simple concepts today. Just get started. Don't be afraid to fail. The version of Mississippi Punch that we're making tonight looks a lot different than the notes I wrote about it a year ago. Okay, so this is a continuous process. If we do it next year, it might be a little different than that. Kyle told me that there are probably a lot of people joining us tonight who don't usually mix cocktails. And so I'm hoping that I broke those recipes down into a way that everybody can digest, because like I say, you can. And I just want to go over a couple of quick tips if maybe you don't have some of your own special equipment at home. First of all, a quick note on terminology. If you are reading Victorian cocktail recipes, you're going to see a wine glass as a measure, okay? I don't know if you can see the perspective, but this is a Victorian wine glass. This is from the 1860s or a little bit later, okay? This measures exactly 2 ounces, okay? And it's remarkable how close the wine glasses that you have that you can find measure 2 ounces. I've got multiple different runs, different patterns of these, all that measure 2 ounces. One measures 1.5 ounces, and this one a little bit later. This is called a goblet. Okay, so this is really more the size we would think of as a wine glass. And so when you see a recipe that says throw in 2 wine glasses, it doesn't mean drain a whole bottle into 2 of these. It's 2 of these. Okay, so that's that. If you don't have any special cocktail equipment at home, that's okay. A lot of these recipes were created before a lot of this stuff was on the market. All right, that having been said, it's pretty accessible. You can go to your local liquor store, you can go to Walmart, Amazon, whatever, and you can get basic versions of this stuff for pretty cheap. But when I got interested in cocktails before I had any equipment, and it's not ideal, but what you can make work for a shaker, you can get you a mason jar and a lid. You screw that sucker on, you can mix just fine. And I used to use my first martinis, I drained it into a glass with a kitchen strainer like this, okay? My buddy Bob Graham made fun of me. He said I was making mountain martinis, but it is possible. And also a lot of things are gonna be measured in ounces. If you don't have like a bartender's kit, ounce measures, that's not a problem. 1/2 ounce is 1 tablespoon, okay? That's half of a liquid ounce. All you gotta do is break it down in that way. And so I try to put that in the recipes. So if you don't have your own cocktail equipment, you're not used to dealing with ounces, hopefully tonight will get you a little bit more comfortable with doing that. A tablespoon is half a liquid ounce. That's all there is to it. Also, another easy thing If you have one of these, like these jars that jelly comes in sometimes, like homemade jelly, you've got ounce measures on the side of that. So they go 2, 4, 6. You can also use this to measure alcohol. So you don't have to have a bunch of fancy equipment to make good cocktails. So without further ado, let's launch into these recipes. The first one I want to do, because I've actually got to send it off to my faithful assistant, also known as my fiance, Amy, to be cooked for a little bit, is Smoking Bishop. Okay, now Smoking Bishop it kind of looks like what we think of as punch, but it's to them it was not actually classified as punch, but it is a batch cocktail that will forever be associated with Christmas because of Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol. After Scrooge is reformed, if you're familiar with the story, he says, "A Merry Christmas, Bob," said Scrooge with an earnestness that could not be mistaken as he clapped him on the back. "A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family, and we'll discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of Smoking Bishop, Bob." So I had to find out what Smoking Bishop was. There's many different recipes for Smoking Bishop as people who wrote them. All right, and so I really encourage you to dig into any of them that look enticing. The one from Convivial Dickens, even though they didn't cite their source, is actually my favorite one that I've had. We're gonna go with an extra easy one tonight since we are doing this all on camera. Jerry Thomas in 1862 actually did have a pretty basic, easy version of Smoking Bishop. So there's a few components. The first thing, you've got to make a coronavirus model by sticking cloves in an orange and roasting it until it's brown. Okay, so it's not really a coronavirus model. Actually, if you didn't roast it, it would be called a pomander, and this is what people used to carry around to kind of get a fresh scent. But if you're doing this in your oven at home, it is as easy as just get an orange, stick those cloves into it, roast it at 400 degrees for about an hour. I think I took it out about 5 minutes earlier because it was looking pretty brown. It just needs to have a nice brown tinge. If you can roast this over a wood fire, do it, because that will make all the difference. The best Smoking Bishop I ever had was last year. I was doing a video about it for Locust Grove, and we were doing it in the hearth kitchen. So I actually got to roast the oranges over the fire, and it really made all the difference from the flavor. But this will be fine for doing it at home. It's just roasting it at 400 degrees. So then, now that we've seen that, we are just going to cut it into quarters. It's going to get kind of leathery. So now I have my roasted orange in quarters. We're going to take a stoneware bowl, put it inside. And I have taken a bottle of port, 1 bottle of port, just a standard 750 milliliter bottle. It doesn't have to be fancy for this, okay? I don't really like to go below the $15 range usually. I like a nice port, so if I get a nice one, I'm probably not gonna mix it with anything. But something in the $15 to $20 range from your liquor store will work just fine. Down below that, you start getting kind of a nasty off taste. If you go to Trader Joe's though, actually they have a pretty decent drinkable one for less than that. And you do wanna go for the ruby port for Smoking Bishop. Bishop was, it was part of a whole series of drinks that were named after clergy and very old drinks, and was referring to the color of their robes, basically. So I have heated up that bottle of Smoking Bishop, and we are just going to put that over the oranges. Just like that. Stir it up. And then this is where you get to incorporate your own taste. You just put in, Jerry Thomas just has you putting in as much sugar as you prefer. Now, it's gonna have some trouble combining with the alcohol, but that's gonna be solved here in a minute when we cook it. Now, I don't like real sweet drinks, so I'm just gonna sprinkle in maybe a couple of tablespoons of sugar. Give that a good stir so everything's in the mix. And I think that's delightful. Okay, like I say, I don't like real sweet drinks, and port is already kind of a rich, sweet thing. So I'm going to leave it there as far as my personal preference goes, with just a couple of tablespoons of sugar. And we're going to be cooking it here in a second. So probably that's going to cook down a little bit and become a little bit more concentrated. But, you know, play around with it and do what you like. And this will go back into the pot. Oranges and all. Like I say, the sugar is not going to combine really well because you're doing it with alcohol, but that's going to be fixed a little bit when you simmer over on the stove. And you can add more sugar later if you want to, but it's easier to put it in than it is to take it out. So I'm going to hand this to my faithful assistant, and it's supposed to stay on for 1/2 hour. But you can adjust that a little bit. It says to simmer it. If you don't want to cook too much of the alcohol off, maybe just keep it to where there's a little bit of steam over top of it. Yeah. And then she's going to bring me some boiling water. So that's all there is to it, to the smoking bishop. And you've got yourself an authentic taste of Charles Dickens right there. Again, explore different recipes, try stuff out. There's much more involved, complicated stuff that involves steeping certain things overnight, and it's totally worth it. So just dig in, but here is a really easy way to get started with smoking bishop. So Amy is going to get that on to steam and simmer a little bit for about 1/2 hour, and we will come back to that at the end of the show. I'm sorry, what? Yeah, if it could be boiling, close to boiling, that'd be great. Okay, so she's going to bring us 10 ounces of boiling water here in a minute. The next thing that we are going to do is an old-fashioned punch that was still printed in the 1860s. And this is the one that I was telling you about, comes from the Oxford Nightcaps book, okay? College boys, I guess, are going to drink, so you may as well teach them to do it right. And these are some pretty fantastic recipes. The one that appeared in the 1860 edition for this is called Punch Royal. All right, and it is a classic old-fashioned punch, but it was printed verbatim with what was in the first manual in 1827. Okay, so I'm going to get my punch bowl out. Not an old punch bowl, but it'll do. So this is kind of one of the oldest ways that European society decided, you know, that distilled spirits would be approachable. All right, they combine them with things like sugar, water, citrus, and spice. And then you've also got the spirit. So that's there's basically 5 ingredients there. That had been going on since around the 17th century. Okay, this general formula since around the 17th century. David Wondrich traces it pretty convincingly to that. It really went strong through the 18th century and into the 19th century. It's still going when the Victorian era dawns. And Wondrich, again, he cites in addition of the Charles Dickens' household words from the early 1850s, though, he's already starting to see a change. People are already starting to move from these big batch cocktails of punch to these individual portions of cocktail. He actually illustrates this by saying he went into a bar where there had previously been beautiful punch bowls arrayed along the wall for the customers. Now they're all piled into a corner. So it starts to turn that corner overnight. Thank you so much. But it still did coexist in the 1860s. It was just well on its way out. And this is very obviously an old-fashioned book. All right. So the first thing we're going to do, see if you can see this. I started this a couple of hours ago. That is lemon peel and sugar. Okay, you'll see in a lot of these early punch recipes to rub a peel with loaf sugar or something of that nature. This is another place where Wondrich really gives you some good tips on what to do about this. If you were just to read it flat out, you would think that you would just combine the citrus with the sugar and go. It's actually a process you want to draw out between 30 and 60 minutes, but it's not hard. The first thing you do is you relieve your lemon of its peel. Okay, you want to keep it in as much of a ribbon as possible, but there's a serious learning curve. You're not going to ruin anything if you break it up. And I'm actually going to do this recipe in a half portion, since a lot of people aren't around as many people at this point in time as they are usually, and there's only 2 of us here. So this is the peel of half a lemon. But if you can get that whole, I don't think I've ever done a whole strand from a whole lemon, but it's really neat. But you do that. You can use just a regular vegetable peeler, and you want to get as little of the white as possible. And then you combine that with just some white sugar. This was just a tablespoon of sugar. You muddle it. All right, and you let it sit, because what that sugar is going to do is it's going to draw the oil, it's going to draw the essence out of that lemon. Okay, and that is the start of quite a few of these early punch recipes. And again, this is kind of archaic by the time that we are interpreting here at the castle, but still hanging on. So we're just going to put that in our punch bowl, or whatever you happen to be using. Sugar and all. You're going to want to take 10 ounces of hot or boiling water. That's 1 1/3 cup. Okay, so 1 1/3 cup of water. Pour that over the top of that. We're going to add the juice of 3 lemons. Citrus does factor in pretty prominently with these, and I juiced these earlier. And get yourself a juicer if you don't have one, and juice those lemons yourself. It makes all the difference. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do 10 ounces of rum and 10 ounces of port. We're going to use the same port that we just did. So just pour that in there. Let's talk about rum. Let's talk about rum for a second. I got my 10 ounces of rum right here. There's 2 different things I want to tell you about tonight. This is plantation rum, okay? It's a true pot distilled Jamaican rum. The rums that they're referring to in these older recipes have a bolder, different character than what we're used to in like Captain Morgan's or something of that nature. These, they're very rich. There's a pot distilled funk they call it hogo. Sounds disgusting, but when you taste it, you'll know what it is, and it's good. But it's just a certain character that these old rums have. And this plantation rings true to everything you read about those early rums. So get it, try it, but I'm not going to recommend it for these cocktails. I've tried it in several different ones, 6 Ways to Sunday. It is wonderful stuff. It is an experience. It will get you close to history. It will also take over these punches. All right. So what I'm going to suggest you use, and we're going to come back to this place. There is a wonderful small distillery in French Lick, Indiana. It's called Spirits of French Lick. My buddy Alan Bishop is the master distiller there, and he is a real master of this stuff, very historically minded. A lot of distilleries like to connect history with their story. With Alan, I know he actually knows what he's talking about and what he's doing, and he's really seeing this stuff through. So this, even though the recipe calls for Jamaica rum, this is Stampers Creek American rum from Spirits of French Lick, and it has everything I was trying to get out of the plantation, but in a quantity that actually complements the rest of the punch rather than taking it over and overshadowing all the rest of the ingredients. Okay, so in Ohio, you can't get it there in Ohio. You can get it in Northern Kentucky though, or if you travel into Indiana, you can get it in Indiana. So if you don't see it at your liquor stores, they can get it and tell them you want it, because this stuff is fantastic. It's the best I've found for this kind of thing. And we're going to see more of that tonight. So 10 ounces of the rum. We're just going to give this a good stir. I don't know if you can see, but it's turning a nice hazy rosy color. And this is basically, this has all the elements of these early punches, but this is an easy way to get started. Okay, if you want to just kind of dip your toes into this, and completely authentic. All right, they're still publishing it in the 1860s. But it goes back at least, it was published by the same place in the 1820s, but probably much earlier than that. It's called Punch Royal. We're just going to take a taste to see where we're at. This is with no extra sugar. And it could use a little more sugar. That citrus is really bold. Get our sugar bowl, and you can play with it. And playing with punch is fun because you can just keep making it and trying it and continuing to do so for your art. There's more sugar in that. And that's a lot closer to what I was thinking. That was probably 2 good tablespoons. If you don't like the taste of citrus strongly, if you don't like the taste of the spirit so much, you're gonna wanna go with more than that. But that's one of the great things about these is you can personalize them. And the recipes do say to sweeten to taste, all right? So you're not being untrue to the original recipe by doing it. One thing, we will not get through this bowl tonight, probably. But punch, a lot of times, was made ahead of time and put into a jug, okay? So absolutely do that. You can keep going back to it. Charles Dickens himself used to make his punches up ahead of time, put them in a jug, lightly seal it up, and put it by the fireplace to keep it warm. What you're gonna wanna do though is, as soon as you're done with this session, before you pack it up or before you even let it sit overnight, take this lemon peel out. All right, because if you leave that sit in it overnight, it is going to give it a horrid off flavor, and it's not going to be good. So before you pack it up, take the lemon peel out, and it'll be good to go for quite a while. You can put it in a jug, put it in the refrigerator for a week, and keep on going back to it. So even if you don't have a lot of people around you to share it with at this point in time, with everything that's going on in the world, you can just pack that up and continue to enjoy it. So that is Punch Royal. This is the early version that is waning in the 1860s. It is waning hard, all right? Not a whole lot of people were still doing that, even though it was still being written about. That's not where the fashion was going, all right? So the next one, we're gonna see how that all changed. I'm gonna set this to the side. Okay, and the next thing we're gonna do is one of my very favorites. It's called Mississippi Punch. Okay, so you've still got that punch, name attached to it, but the quantity of spirit that goes into this is about as much as we would think of as going into about 2 cocktails. So if you've ever gone to a restaurant, you've got a martini, Manhattan, one of those classic cocktails, this has about double that. All right, and so maybe Jerry Thomas was serving this up to one person. They were just having a really good night. Usually what I do here at home is I'll make one of the quantity and I'll split it into 2 drinks for Amy and me to kind of enjoy. And if we want to do more, then we just do more. So we're rounding that corner from the idea of the big bowl of batch cocktail, right, like that, into this individual cocktail really taking hold. And that's really kind of looked upon as an American influence on the drinking culture, on the drinking fashion. And, you know, Americans were known as go-ahead people. So, and the pace of life was quickening severely in the Victorian period. You're talking about the steamships come in, the railroads come in. People are starting to need a watch, okay? You know, a watch was a rich man's luxury at the dawn of the 19th century. You didn't need one. Once the railroads are coming through, everything's about a schedule at that point. And so it was only a matter of time that the leisurely bowl of punch with your friends kind of wanes and these smaller, quicker cocktails really take hold. And so let's take a look at Mississippi Punch. This again comes from Jerry Thomas in 1862. Recipes for this continue to appear at least through the 1880s. I don't know exactly when it waned, but its character might not go real well in the classic era of cocktails. And so this is kind of a unique taste of the Victorian period that we'll be seeing. The first thing we do is we dissolve sugar in water. We're going to use this regular cocktail shaker tonight. Sometimes they would use shaking glasses, but you did start to see devices such as this get patented during the Victorian period. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to dissolve 1.5 tablespoons of sugar. So we're just gonna put that in there. A lot of people, every time I do one of these, somebody speaks up and says, can't I just do simple syrup? Sure you can. You don't have to. And if you really want to get the period experience, I would say just go ahead and dissolve that sugar. Especially in the case of some of the early mint juleps where they have you dissolving sugar, you're just not going to get the full experience out of the simple syrup. There's just something about the way the sugar crystals mingle with everything else that makes it really special. Now, a lot of the manuals will tell you to do chilled water. This is one place where I'm going to depart. I'm going to do room temperature water just because the sugar is going to dissolve better. Okay, and we're going to chill it down anyway, and so I don't think I'm really being remiss here. And since we're also going to put ice in here, there's going to be liquid introduced to it. I'm going to put twice the amount of water as the amount of sugar in. So that's going to be 3 tablespoons. It's all going to come out in the end. Put that in. Just going to take a few seconds. That's pretty good. Whether it says it or not, if you're ever looking at a recipe that says to dissolve sugar, be sure you do that before you put the spirit in. The sugar's not going to want to dissolve in the liquor at all. So just be sure you got that kind of wrapped up. Okay, now we've got 3 spirits that we're going to do tonight. Once again, we've already talked, this is going to be all spirits of French Lick on this one, okay, because they just have the perfect range of products on this. We've already talked about the Stamper's Creek rum. That's one. Calls for bourbon whiskey, okay? And you don't have a whole lot of cocktail recipes calling for bourbon whiskey in the 1860s. There's a few, but a couple of words on bourbon. It was what we think of as bourbon now did more or less exist in the 19th century. We have a legal definition of it though, okay? That was passed through Congress in the 1960s. So there are only certain things that you can legally label as bourbon. All right, it's an act of Congress. So at this point, it's a cultural definition. All right, the first reference to Kentucky whiskey being called bourbon was in the early 1820s. And what we think of legally as bourbon did come out of the Kentucky distilling culture. Okay, we're talking about a corn-heavy whiskey aged in charred oak barrels. All right, now here's a couple from Spirits of French Lick that you might want to try on this. This is fantastic. I believe it was just declared in some forum. Alan Bishop might be on here. He might be able to tell us. This has been declared recently like the best of the non-Kentucky bourbons, and it stacks up against any Kentucky bourbon that I've ever had. This is the Lee Sinclair. All right, this is bottled in bond. There's also a 2-year Lee Sinclair, which is one of the only really good 2-year bourbons out there. So whichever one you can get a hold of, this would be a great choice. It's got classic bourbon mash bill, and one of the components are oats. And that's one thing that we don't think of in bourbon a lot, but we did have oats produced in Kentucky, and especially when you're dealing with something that developed out of farm distilleries and people making the most out of their grain crops, and you've got oats. They were certainly a part of those early Kentucky whiskeys and those early bourbons. The site where I work at Locust Grove in Louisville, we have a distillery project going, and we discovered that they were in fact growing oats. And so we've been incorporating oats. You'll know it when you taste it. It's something different. It's rounder, it's rich. It's just wonderful. Okay, so that's one option. Me and Alan actually had a discussion about this. I didn't want to be steering anybody wrong. This is another one from Spirits of French Lick. This is the Maddie Gladden High Rye Bourbon. And I had this here one night. I was testing out this recipe for Mississippi Punch. I just wanted to see what that high rye content did. Now, rye is spicier than corn. Corn's very sweet. And so what I found is the very sweet nature of this beverage just mixed and complemented really well with that rye. So this is, again, true bourbon. We don't always know what was going into bourbon in 1862. Certainly rye was a part of that in at least some cases. So I'm just going to go ahead and say, somebody can tell me I'm wrong, but using a high rye bourbon is great for this. That little bit of rye flavor in there is really going to go well with all of the other flavors. There's a third spirit that we're going to put in here, and I'm very passionate about this story. Brandy. Okay. Brandy was a big part of American spirit culture, especially in this region, prior to Prohibition. All right, that, what was it, 13-year period changed the spirit landscape in America in some cases irreparable ways. It doesn't seem like that long, but it made big changes. Basically brandy went away and whiskey came back. All right, this also from Spirits of French Lick is the Old Clifty Hoosier Apple Brandy. This is a true revival of American brandy. Okay, a lot of these recipes call for cognac, which is a French brandy. When it just says brandy and it's an American recipe, I assume it means domestic brandy, since it was so common. Apple brandy was very common in the United States. You had apple orchards all over this region, and the Old Clifty, this is a true revival, and the only one that I can confidently say is really like what you would have been tasting in the 19th century. It's like a cousin to bourbon, but it's not. If you can try it, please try it. It'll change your life. So let's launch into getting this stuff into the shaker. So it's measured in wine glasses. So let's just go ahead and do it the Victorian way. We're going to use our wine glass. Again, if you're at home following along, 4 tablespoons. Wine glass of brandy. And the other 2 are half a wine glass. So if you're following along at home, that's 2 tablespoons. 4 tablespoons for the big one and 2 for the small. There's our rum. There's that bourbon. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a lemon wedge, cut off about 1/4 of a lemon, and squeeze that over top. And let me see if my ice actually survived. Using usual lump ice is perfectly fine. Not going to hurt anything. Pick up. Like I say, I'm going to split this up between 2 glasses. And if you get artistic with this, you garnish it with a lemon wedge, an orange wedge, an orange slice, and berries in season. And refrigeration and the supermarkets and greenhouses have kind of rendered in season irrelevant. So there we have it. Amy, there's one for you. You can rinse this out. I would appreciate it. Okay, so let's look at the visual difference. New punch. Old punch. Okay, so this is the direction that drinking is going in. And, you know, we've had some kind of trendy punch houses pop up right now. but the individual cocktail still reigns king. So let's see how we did. And yeah, that's just a perfect balance, mingling of things. It's not too sweet. If you're not somebody who likes the taste of spirits for what they are, that it really just kind of balances everything out. It's very mild, could be dangerous. So this is really nice. It's a chilled one again. The other one was hot, not that you didn't have chilled punches before, but you see very clearly here, even though this isn't quite what you might find in a bar today, this is the direction that cocktails were going in and led us into the 20th century. So this is Mississippi Punch. If you were mixing along at home, I hope you're enjoying it. All right. I've been talking for a while. We've just got one more. They asked me in to do punch, but we're shaking hands with Christmas here. And what would Christmas be without eggnog? So we're going to look both at Jerry Thomas and at the manual from 1869, the Steward and Barkeeper's Manual by Jesse Haney. And we're going to go to our cocktail shaker, or you can do a cocktail glass like they did in in that era a lot. And this again is going to come out similar to what we would think of as being two cocktails. So, tablespoon of sugar. 2 tablespoons of room temperature water. Mix that up. Okay. 1 egg. Crack that into your shaker. And this one calls for cognac. Okay, you're going to see this in a lot of these early cocktail recipes. I use Hennessy for mixing. Okay, here in Kentucky, it's about $33, I think, for the bottle. It's a basic cognac. It mixes very nicely, I think. You can spend as much money as you absolutely would like on cognac, and I am sure it will be wonderful. But this is at least a good way to get started. So again, they call for a wine glass. There's our cognac. Once again, we're going to the Stampers Creek rum. Half a wine glass. Our friends at Spirits of French Lick. At this point, I want to talk about a variant. We're about to do this cold. You can also do it hot if you prefer a hot beverage. All it takes is boiling the milk, but we'll get to that in a second. You can also, in 1869, some variants that were written are doing it with all brandy instead of any rum at all. And he does mention brandy, just not as cognac. So I'm assuming he's thinking you might be using domestic American brandy. He also says that you can balance out brandy and rum, which is basically what we're doing, or do all rum. So he gives you a lot of options there in 1869 if you want to try any of that out. He also discusses in that book that you can use sherry if you don't want such a strong cocktail. Okay, so you can use sherry, which is just a fortified wine, usually comes in like 19-20% or so. So that's another option, completely documented in the 1860s for this beverage. But without any further ado, we are going to do 2.5 ounces of milk. You probably do want to stick to whole milk for this. Nobody's drinking this to get healthy. Skim is just not going to be satisfying. Okay, we're going to put ice in our shaker again. And again, I mentioned it a little bit out of order, but if you'd rather have a hot beverage, boil the milk, but still shake it. Jerry Thomas emphasizes making sure this is very well combined, and he's right, as usual. So feel free to just go to town on this one. Okay, and again, I'm going to split this into 2 glasses, but you know, if you're settling in for the evening, you just want the whole thing, that's your business. Can't believe we've made it this far, and this is the first time we're grating nutmeg. Used in all different kinds of ways that we don't think of now, but just grate a little nutmeg over the top of that. The fresh grated does make a difference. All right, there's one for Amy. And cheers, hope somebody out there is mixing along. Let's try these together. And that's just great. It's what I remember having from the grocery store as a kid, except grown-up ingredients. And so, yeah, this just tastes like Christmas. It's easy. The ingredients are very accessible. So highly recommend trying this. A lot of people get nervous when they look at the raw egg in a beverage, but that was actually really common up into the 20th century to have eggs shaken in beverages. It doesn't really, you don't see it as much in this because it's so milk heavy, but in a lot of these that you see the egg shaken in, it'll give it more of like a froth, almost like a sub meringue that you wouldn't have otherwise, and a really neat texture. First time I tried it, I was nervous, but I was absolutely glad I did. So hope you can enjoy this with your holiday festivities. And I'm going to see if Amy might be willing to bring the smoking bishop back over. Let's get back to where we started. Thank you. I'm just going to pour it back in the bowl. Okay, so all these ingredients have been cooking together the whole time we've been talking here. Let's see if I can show you this without spilling it. I don't know that I can, but it is a rich purple, velvety, citrusy mixture, and it does indeed look like a bishop's rose, which is where the name came from. Get our ladle. Pour a little bit of that out. Okay, you'd like to try along with this? It'd be a miracle if we're on time for work in the morning. And that's great. You know, this is the easiest version of this I've ever tried, but I gotta say, one of the best. It is how would you describe that? Just sweet enough. Yeah, it's sweet, it's velvety. We use, like I say, I think maybe a couple of heaping tablespoons of sugar, and it's definitely sweeter and more balanced now than it was when it went in. And that citrus and spice just creates a really, really nice experience. I hope you will give it a try, because if you do, you'll really see why Scrooge served it after he was reformed and trying to make up to everybody. There are lots of variations on this. Like I say, every recipe you try will be a little bit different. I do encourage you to jump in, and I do encourage you to roast that citrus over actual fire if you can. If you don't, we didn't today either, and it's still fantastic. You'll see some recipes have lemons instead of oranges. I've never actually done that. Some recipes also have grapefruit in with the oranges, and in every case I've ever tried that, it just wasn't right. It imparted something that just, it was an off flavor. So I would say, if you want to try the grapefruit, try it, but sticking to the oranges or maybe with the lemon variant is really the best way to go on this beverage. All right, well, those are our 4 recipes. And if you started out interested, but now you're terrified, but you still want a well-documented 1860s beverage, Jerry Thomas has the one for you. He says, the brandy straight. Place a tumbler in front of your customer. Place an ice cube in the tumbler. Uncork the brandy. Place it in front of your customer. The brandy straight. He says this is a very manageable way to drink, but also dangerous if somebody's on a bender. So you can keep it just as simple as you like and still be drinking in the 1860s. Just like I say, pay attention to those varieties of cocktails or those varieties of spirits. If you can get a hold of some of that stuff in Spirits of French Lick, I highly recommend it for historical applications. And that's what I've got for tonight. And Kyle, do we have questions?
We sure do. So thank you very much, Brian. There were a couple people that were following along and were tasting along with you. So if any of those people would like to take a minute to share how theirs turned out, I would love to hear from you. So if you want to raise your hand on your screen, I can call on you. You can unmute yourself for me. So anyone out there want to tell us about how your drinks ended up? They're all shy, Brian. They need more drinks in them, I think. All right, we got Christina here. Yeah.
I don't really have anything like fantastic to say, except I've never mixed my own drinks other than margaritas before. And the Mississippi Punch is amazing.
Oh, good.
It's amazing. I've never had eggnog before tonight. This was my first ever sip and taste, and it's not my favorite. But I think
that will be the case.
I feel like maybe because it came after this, which is delicious, that maybe that's the problem and I shouldn't mix them.
I agree. Honestly, I think the Mississippi Punch is really more my style too. And usually when I've tried the eggnog, it's just been kind of on its own. So I think you're onto something there.
Yeah, but it was great. I'm so glad I came. This was amazing. Thank you.
Good. Thank you for coming.
Yep. Thank you, Christina. And then is anyone else that made the drinks that want to say anything? I see Sarah. Did you want to say something?
Yeah.
Hey, thanks,
Hi.
Brian.
It was so much fun.
Yeah, we really enjoyed it. If we wanted to make the eggnog a little more frothy, what will we do?
That's a good question. I haven't tried, but you probably want more egg.
Mm-hmm. Like I've seen it kind of like foamy and kind of like that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it with what you're seeing at home too, you might just want to also shake it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because ours wound up pretty frothy here. I'm looking at Amy's right now, and it's got the head on it that you would expect from an egg cocktail.
It tastes good.
So,
so does the Mississippi Punch. That's amazing.
Good. Yeah, I would recommend just maybe giving it some more aggressive shakes.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Josh, I saw you had your hand raised.
Yeah. Hey, Brian.
Was that Josh Wilson?
Yeah.
Hey, Josh.
Hey, I just wanted to touch on the eggnog recipe. It's the first time I've ever seen it done like that. And that looks really cool. It's something I'll definitely be trying here in a little bit myself. As far as the eggnog with the frothiness goes, I've made eggnog with some friends before, where we separated the eggs, and then we whipped the whites, we whipped the yolks, we whipped the cream, and then we put it all back together, and it made it way more frothy.
Gotcha.
Something else that I would like to mention on that is the eggnog that you get out of the store today is pasteurized. And that helps make a lot of people less squeamish about having the raw egg.
Right.
But eggnog in an alcoholic sense like this is like ceviche, that South American dish where you cook the fish with the lime. The alcohol in the eggs actually helps cook the eggs. So if you're squeamish about raw eggs, adding the alcohol to it will help sort of cook those and prepare those in a way.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, Josh is a good buddy, and we explore all things Victorian together. And yeah, that's interesting about the whipping it first. The recipes, all the recipes I saw from the 1860s, literally, Jerry Thomas has you kind of mixing it with the sugar a little bit. The one from 1869 literally just has you dropping it in. So that's interesting. I'll have to try that later.
I'll see if I can come up with the Victorian recipe that we used and send that to you.
Nice, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Josh. So we have one person wants you to come to the castle whenever all this is over with to do a tasting. Yeah, so there's that. Then some questions came in. Can you roast oranges on the grill? So
yeah, sure. I don't know if I would use just straight charcoal, like lump charcoal. I would probably, at the very least, use like the hardwood charcoal. If you can, just, I mean, if you just want to burn some wood down to coals, then that'll work perfectly fine. That's what I did last year when I was actually in the hearth kitchen. But yeah. When I was able to do it there, actually what I used was basically a camp grill, and just not like an 18th century camp grill, just something that I could spread out like a grate over top of the coals. So it was basically a grill. So yeah, I would say I would absolutely do that. I would avoid the lump charcoal and probably use something more of a wood nature. But yeah, that's great. Go for it.
Also, are there any domestic cognac type spirits you would recommend?
Domestic cognac, no. Really, I mean, the French stuff, like I say, Hennessy. Where is it? Hennessy is actually, it's French cognac. It's available everywhere, and it's pretty accessible. You can go cheaper than this and still have it be French cognac. I haven't tried that. This just seemed like a good baseline to me. I don't use enough of it that it breaks the bank. I would suggest, sticking in this realm. I could be wrong about this. I don't know of an American company making something they're calling cognac. And again, when we get into the American domestic brandy, I cannot recommend it enough. I really recommend exploring the Spirits of French Lookout brandy. I seriously, they don't pay me. I just believe in this product quite a bit. So this is a real revival of what was going on here in the United States in the 19th century. And especially in the case of the eggnog, the later recipe actually did have you using just brandy, so it's kind of open to interpretation. I'll say also, you can get some French apple brandies. They're good. The ones I have do not have this the ones I've had do not have this character. All right, so I've kind of even shaped my life path around trying to rediscover the spirit. So I can't say enough good things about it. However you can get a hold of it, You just got to drive out to French Lick. You can stop in the distillery and buy it there.
I think that segued right into our next question, which I think you've answered, maybe asking what is your favorite brandy?
Was my favorite brandy? Yeah, that's the funny thing. I wasn't really into brandy before all this started. Before I really got into working on Locust Grove distillery project and meeting Alan Bishop and things like that. But I mean, if I was to pull something off the shelf that I just wanted to drink it, it would be this. I'm a whiskey guy, and this is kind of, you can see how this was produced right alongside of whiskey, bourbon in particular, and rye out in the East. So I love this stuff. And that's honestly, that's my word about brandy. I know half of this is sounding like a commercial for it, but I just can't say enough good things. And we're working on some other projects right now at Locust Grove to continue this exploration of trying to reproduce what this lost American brandy was like.
Someone also asked what the process is like for you when you're taking the original recipes and kind of translating them for people like we have on the video, like myself, who are just kind of getting interested in historical cocktails.
Oh, what's my process?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's really jumping in. You know what really helped me to really find these cocktails to be accessible was I did a lot of work in historical cooking first. So then, like especially like early to mid 19th century, into the late 19th century too. And so the thing was, when I got into these, like Jerry Thomas and all that, the language didn't seem that strange because I was already used to dealing with the ideas and the units of measure and things of that nature. And so really with any of this, the process is just to get started, honestly, and keep going. Do trial and error, have fun, enjoy yourself. You know, and then, like I said, for me, I mean, part of the reason why I was able to learn about how to convert all of this into modern terms is because I needed to do it for myself. You know, when I was trying to figure out what these measures were. So it's really just, I mean, the key is to get started, stick with it, and have fun. You know, don't be afraid of failure. Keep a notebook. You know, that's what I do. I keep a notebook with dates. So I can go back, see what I did before, see what I found out now, and how that changed. Like I say, the Mississippi Punch we made tonight is very different from my first try, very superior. But it's just because I wasn't afraid to fail. I wasn't afraid to experiment, keep learning, and take notes because you will forget. And so that's my word of advice. If you really just want to dig into it and make some progress, and it's a continuous experience. If I give this talk in another year or two, I'll have new stuff to tell because I'm not done exploring. And so just get involved, have fun, stick with it. Don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to learn.
Another person would like to ask if you would share the recipe for, I believe, ask for the first recipe, which is Smoking Bishop. If you wouldn't mind sharing that with everyone.
Yeah, sure.
After
Can I
the
send it to
event.
you and then have it sent out?
Yeah, sure. So for everyone on here, I will send that out to you all. We do a follow-up email after these, after each meeting or session that we do. So if you don't get something from me within the next few days, check your spam or junk mail. Unfortunately, the Castle's email system has a propensity to end up in your junk or spam folders. So look for that. If you don't hear anything from me, you can reach me at education@mariacastle.org. Okay?
Yeah, I'll send one for Royal Punch too, because it's really easy. And if you're interested in getting a taste of that earlier phase of punch, it's perfect way to jump into it.
Great. One other question we had is for the punch. What berries would you suggest being used? Blueberries, blackberries? Yeah.
Oh, for the Mississippi Punch?
Yes.
Whatever's your favorite. I always use blackberries because I love blackberries. We had some raspberries tonight, so I put those in. But that's the neat thing about some of these recipes. They're approaching it from a world when you can't get everything all the time, produce-wise. And so a lot of times when Jerry Thomas talks about a garnish, he tells you to use whatever of a certain category in season. So he wasn't in a world where you could go to the grocery store and get the same things all year round. So at a time when we can, the sky's the limit. So whatever's your favorite, do it. Like I say, I love blackberries, and so that's what I do. If you like blueberries better, use blueberries. That's completely accurate.
Great. We had one comment from Betsy, and she says there's a Cleveland, for us Ohioans at least, there's a Cleveland company that makes a product they call Applejack that drinks a lot like whiskey that might be easier to find here in Ohio. They're called Tom's Foolery. So
you can find Applejack. Yeah, I'm interested in that one that she mentioned. I'd like to try that. Laird's is one of the only Apple Jacks that survived in a big way after Prohibition. And I honestly don't like it very much, to tell you the truth. But I would like to try that one that Betsy mentioned.
Yeah, great. And I would just mention that for, at least for the bourbon, and I think if you ever run into a gin recipe for those around here in Ohio, I'm not sure if it's made it down to where you're at, Louisville, but there is Watershed Distillery located out of Columbus, makes an excellent bourbon. And I'm not sure if they're doing rum right now, but that's a good local for us here in the Buckeye State. So
Neat, yeah.
yeah.
And a word on gin too. I didn't get into a gin recipe tonight, but London Dry is kind of what we default to these days, like the Bombays, Tanqueray, stuff like that. It's great stuff, but the imports of London Dry gin didn't become the majority into the United States until the 1890s. And so if you're dealing with something from the mid-19th century, really all the way through the 1880s, you really want to look for an Old Tom gin. That's one of the more accessible. It's not as common. It's not nearly as common as London Dry, but if you use an Old Tom gin, that's going to get you a lot closer to what those recipes were actually intending. Spirits of French Lick has one of those too. And David Wondrich, the author that I was telling you about, he helped develop one called Ransom. And it's very good as well.
Great. Is there any other questions that we missed or anything? Does anyone has their video on have anything else they want to add? So just raise your hand and I can call on you. And one other person, Wes, or one of my colleagues here at the castle, know that you can buy Watershed Distillery from a local place here in Marietta for those of us that are very, very local to the castle here at Weber's, just around the corner from the castle, in fact.
Great.
So, yeah.
Yeah,
all right.
Support those local distilleries. It's a wonderful thing that's going on.
Yeah.
1862, actually, the tax code changed that really shifted the advantage to the big guys. And we lost a lot from the farm distilleries and things like that existed before. And we're nowhere close to getting farm distilleries back. But these micro distilleries that are really able to do some neat stuff, yeah, support those guys. Absolutely.
Great. And I have one last thing for everyone that I will share from the castle. And don't mind me, I'll just be doing this quick screen share for all of us. That's the last slide that we saw, but if you enjoyed tonight's presentation, we sure would like to know about it. So either just let us know or send in a donation or become a member. And so there you have the links, and I'll be putting the links into a chat feature for us here in just a second, as well as that will be coming out in an email to you all following the event. So, Brian, is there anything else you wanted to add at the moment?
I just really enjoyed this. I appreciate you having me. I loved talking to everybody tonight. And so, yeah, just happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and I hope you can take something from this and enjoy yourself with it. And yeah.
Great, thanks very much, Brian. And I'm getting those links right here into the chat for you. And there's a lot of people saying thanks on the chat feature, Brian, just so you know. I know you can't
really
see the
appreciate
screen
everybody
here.
coming tonight.
So, all right. So thanks a lot, everyone. If anyone has any questions or just wants to show or talk about the recipes that we had tonight, or wants to show off what you all produced, go ahead and send that to us via email. I'll go ahead and remove the spotlight for everyone. So if they wanted to go in gallery view and wave all of our little class here goodbye, you can do so. So thanks a lot, Brian. We'll be talking. Everyone else, thanks so much for showing up. We'll talk to you later. Have a happy holidays.
Thanks, everybody.